Welcome everybody. I think we're going to start right about now as it turns to 12 o'clock. So good afternoon everyone and welcome to Bronchiectasis Question Time webinar, which on this occasion is focused on airway clearance techniques. So we really hope that you'll get lots of useful information today to take back with you on airway clearance. I'm Pippa Powell. I'm the director of the European Lung Foundation, and I'm here with members of our bronchiectasis patient advisory team, patient advisory group, and our patient input team, who've been working closely together to plan this event today to deliver on World Bronchiectasis Day. There's also two members of the patient advisory group who are part of the panel who will help run the discussions and ask the questions of the experts. So today is World Bronchiectasis Day, so happy World Bronchiectasis Day to everybody. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So first of all, I just need to give you some housekeeping details, the boring part, so bear with me. The first thing to mention, if we can move to the next slide, is that translations are available for this webinar. And for translations, we use the Wordly tool, and you can get access to subtitles of what's being spoken in over 60 languages. So if you use the QR code on the slide here, or the link that we'll put into the chat, you can access the tool and you'll be able to choose the language that you want to see the information in. Wordly will open in a separate screen and you can position the screen alongside the webinar so you can watch the webinar alongside the translation. You can read the transcript on the screen or you can also listen along to the audio. The choice is yours. Automated translation isn't perfect, and we're sorry about that, but we hope that it really helps you understand what's being said today. If you have any problems, then please email info@europeanlung.org and a member of the ELF team should be able to help you. So if we move, I think, to talk about the webinar itself. So this event is in a webinar format. So you can see all of the panelists who are part of this webinar, but we can't see all the participants. And everyone who is a participant is on mute. So unfortunately, you won't be able to talk, but you can put any of your questions in the chat and in the Q&A. And we obviously have some questions that people submitted prior to the webinar that we already have prepared to ask our experts. One thing to note is that we can't answer personal questions about your condition. So we can talk about issues more broadly, but we can't deal obviously with individual cases. This webinar is being recorded and it will be made available to everybody on the ELF website in the next few days, and you will be sent a link when it is available. So World Bronchiectasis Day. So today is World Bronchiectasis Day, July the 1st. And the aim of today is to raise awareness, share knowledge, and discuss the ways that we can reduce the burden of bronchiectasis for people who live with the condition and their families. World Bronchiectasis Day was started by the COPD Foundation in the USA, and you can access their website where there's more information available. So both ELF and the EMBARC initiative are partners in this global coalition, and we really hope that we have an international audience today. So we're hoping that there's people from all across the world who have joined us for our webinar. If you are online today, please go on social media and say that you're here. Use the hashtag World Bronchiectasis Day 2026, and we'd love it if you could tag ELF, EMBARC, ERS and the COPD Foundation, and we'll put those handles into the chat. So the last thing from me today is to tell you about an exciting initiative from the European Lung Foundation, and that's ELF Connect. If we can move to the next slide. So ELF Connect is a new initiative from the ELF, and the aim of the initiative is to connect people with trusted multilingual health information from the European Lung Foundation and the European Respiratory Society. It is based on AI and it empowers patients and caregivers to help manage their condition and find answers to their questions. What we also hope it will do is allow patients to talk to healthcare professionals, to share their views and ask questions of each other and really build the professional-patient relationship. So we're trialing this platform in bronchiectasis because you, as the bronchiectasis community, are super engaged, and it's a really good place to start. So feel free to go online, check out this tool. It's really a pilot, so we would love your feedback on whether you think it's useful, and yeah, really excited to see what's possible with this new tool. But for now, I'd like to welcome you all. It's great to see everyone in the chat introducing themselves and saying where they're from. So please continue to do that because we love seeing where you're from. And I will hand over to the panel who are going to run the webinar today. So thank you very much.
So thank you, Pippa, for this introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Justine Hamayin, and I will be co-hosting the question session today alongside my colleague, Michal Steinberg. Michal and I will be taking it in turns to put your submitted questions to our panel. As Pippa mentioned, we can't answer questions relating to individual cases. And for today's webinar, we have classified the questions that were submitted into different themes. As well as listening to the answers from our panel, you can also put written questions in the Q&A box, and we aim to reply to these after the event if we don't cover them today. So before we dive into the questions, I'm inviting each of our panelists to introduce themselves. So let's start with Eleni. If you can tell us your name, role, and location, please.
Thank you, Justine. I send you a warm welcome to everybody in this webinar from Greece. I am Eleni Kortiano. I'm professor in respiratory physiotherapy, adults and pediatrics at the University of Thessaly, which is located in central Greece. In this webinar, I will give you some simple information about how we can perform airway clearance techniques from the side of understanding the lung physiology.
Thank you, Eleni. And Danielle, please.
Hi, good afternoon here in Israel. My name is Danielle. I'm the lead respiratory physiotherapist in Carmel Medical Center in Haifa, and I work very closely with Professor Steinberg in the bronchiectasis clinic here in Haifa.
Thank you, Danielle. And Irene, please.
Hi, I'm Irene, a member of the patient advisory group working alongside Justine. And I was diagnosed with bronchiectasis in late 2024, just over a year and a half ago. I live in Hong Kong. Airway clearance is an important self-management tool. So I hope everyone will be able to get something out of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. And Paul, please.
Hi, everybody. My name's Paul McKellion. I'm a respiratory physiotherapist and academic in Newcastle hospitals in the United Kingdom. And I'm just finishing a PhD in airway clearance and bronchiectasis. So yeah, I'm delighted to speak to everyone today. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Paul. And finally, Michal, please.
Hello, thank you all. So my name is Michal Steinberg. I'm a professor of Respiratory Medicine in Carmel Medical Center and the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. I'm here to co-host with Justine and also to answer some questions as a clinician, so I'll be also part of the panel. And we're really looking forward to working through your questions on airway clearance techniques. But before we jump in the question that you have all sent us, we're going to set the foundation for our discussion, and it's my pleasure to invite Eleni Cortiano to share her screen and to walk us through the science of breathing mechanism. So this will help to frame many of the questions that you have asked, and we'll try to answer. So Eleni, thank you so much, and over to you, please.
Thank you, Michael. The first slide, please. So for this presentation, I have no conflict of interest. Next slide, please. And we all know that airway clearance techniques are priority of managing bronchiectasis, and most patients are familiar with at least one of these techniques you see on your screen. Evidence shows that using these techniques is more effective than cough alone or doing nothing. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. What is the benefit of respiratory mechanics in tracheobronchial clearance? Respiratory mechanics is the engine that helps mucus move. When we inhale, as you see in your screen, the air goes deep into the lungs, and when we exhale, the air flows back out. This movement of air is in and out of the lungs helps mucus to move towards the larger airways and the trachea, where it is then plugged, coughed, and plugged up. Next slide, please. Why does mucus get stuck? We all know that in bronchiectasis, the physiological cleaning mechanism of the lungs doesn't work properly. And this is because many causes happen. For example, the airways become widened and damaged. The cilia, these tiny hairs inside the lungs, don't work properly. The mucus becomes thick and collects inside the airways. This trapped mucus makes us breathe harder and encourages infections. Next slide, please. So, can we help mucus to move? And the answer is yes, and we all know this. But which is the best way? There are different ways to help mucus to move, but the best is breathing. Using the breathing techniques, we gently squeeze the lungs from the inside to move mucus. Think that the mucus may be a toothpaste. When we gently press the tube, the toothpaste doesn't move. However, when we try to squeeze the toothpaste, the mucus is like the toothpaste, and we can make it slide. The challenge is how to correctly squeeze our airways. And this is the most important thing for all patients with bronchiectasis, to recognize how correct squeeze their airways. Next slide, please. The secret is the speed of air. For example, the flow of air. Airway clearance techniques help create the right flow of the air. At inhalation, Having a slow flow, the air gets behind the mucus. And next, when we exhale faster, the mucus starts moving. This is because shear forces during forced exhalation separate thick mucus from the cilia. We, as physiotherapists, we educate our patients with bronchiectasis to recognize the level of the airways that have mucus and adopt the correct speed of the air to move the mucus out. Next slide, please. So think like a river. Making airway clearance technique is like a river. Fast air moves mucus like the fast river carries leaves. Next slide, please. A good technique for creating a strong flow is huffs. Huffs is not a cough. It's not a cough. Huff create fast airflow and the airways stay more open during huffing than during coughing. We take a deep, slow breathing with our mouth open and we do quick huff, squeezing the airways, and this helps mucus move. Next slide, please. Another technique is the oscillations. These tiny vibrations in the airways that loosens mucus and make it easier to move. Next slide, please. Another technique is the positive pressure on the mouth, which keeps the mouth and the airways open and gets the air behind the mucus and prevents airway collapse, making the mucus easier to move. And finally, next slide, please. A technique that patients with bronchiectasis need to know how to perform is that the one you see in your screen, the active cycle of breathing techniques that combine easy and deep breaths with huffs. These techniques need to be taught by a specialized physiotherapist, a respiratory physiotherapist. Next slide, please. Very briefly, to take a home message is that breathing is a treatment. Airway clearance is not just breathing. It uses the physiology and the science of airflow to open the airways, to get the air behind the mucus and move the mucus upward, making coughing more effective. And you also remember that the goal is not to cough harder. The goal is to move the mucus smarter. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Eleni, for your very useful and helpful presentation. So let's start with a question in relation with your explanation of breathing mechanism. So how do I listen to crackles and what types exist and what do they tell me about mucus position in the airway?
Yeah. So crackles are sounds that we can hear using a stethoscope as healthcare professionals. And we can hear crackles as the air moves through the lungs. Patients don't have a stethoscope to hear the crackles, but they should know the two types of crackles. The first one is coarse crackles, which are louder and sound a bit like a separating Velcro and may change disappear or even move when you do cough or when you do airway clearance techniques. The other type of crackles is the fine crackles. These crackles are softer and sound like gently rubbing hair between your fingers. These are usually caused by very small airways when small airways suddenly open. They are less typical in patients with bronchiectasis, and patients cannot recognize their presence. Fine crackles usually point out the very small airways opening rather than the mucus itself. So, it's most important for patients with bronchiectasis is to realize the coarse crackles. What about the position of the crackles, of the mucus? It is important to remember that using a stethoscope, we get a clue about the location of the mucus. As I said, patients cannot have a stethoscope to recognize. However, patients know better than anyone else their symptoms, their sputum production, and how your breathing changes when you have cough or phlegm. So patients can have a sense whether the secretions of the lungs are. Or even if there are a lot of secretions, patients can feel putting their hands on their chest. And also they can be trained by a physiotherapist how to recognize the position of the mucus. One useful thing that we have to pay attention is whether the sound change during your breath or after your cough or after you perform an airway clearance technique. This means that patients should be educated to recognize the position of the mucus and how they can move the mucus to the upper airways.
Okay, thanks, Eleni, for this element. So, as you mentioned, the airway clearance techniques, please, question Danielle for you. Please, how many times per day should we perform airway clearance? If you can tell us.
Hi, so that's a difficult question because everybody is different. No one patient is the same. I would definitely say that airway clearance should be performed at least once a day. However, if you have a lot of secretions, you should do morning, evening, and you can even do it more than twice a day if you are unwell or you have an infection and you have a lot of secretions. I usually tell my patients when does it bother you the most? What time of day do you have the most secretions? Does it bother you? Do the secretions bother you at night? Can you not sleep? Do your airway clearance before you go to bed? If you get up in the morning and you're drowning in secretions, do your airway clearance then. And it's a bit of a trial and error. It's a bit, you can try in the morning and see if you feel better during the day. You can try at night and see if you feel better. You can do definitely more than once a day, but a minimum I'd go for once. Does any of my other colleagues have any other thoughts about this one?
No, Danielle, I think you've kind of nailed it there in the head. We do tend to just personalize it, and as well as that, you always have to think that kind of patients, like all of us, have sometimes busy lives, and sometimes what we want them to do might be twice a day, but because of maybe family responsibilities, care responsibilities, personal responsibilities, that they're not able to do that. So you're right, kind of fitting around their schedule is probably the easiest way to try and gain that adherence or kind of compliance with a lot of our treatments.
Okay, thanks. So as you talk about patients, Irene, as a patient, how do you fit airway clearance into your daily routine? If you can tell us, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm retired, so it's easier for me to fit in airway clearance, into my daily schedule. I do it twice a day. One in the morning, normally it's after my household chores, before I go out for grocery shopping. And then the other one, I will do it in the afternoon, late afternoon. Normally, it's after my outdoor walk. So I try to do it before dinner. Now, two things. One thing is I try to do some physical activity before my airway clearance, because with some kind of warming up, I feel that it's easier to move my mucus. Second thing is I try to avoid doing airway clearance soon after a meal, because if I do it after a meal, I would be very worried about reflux. So that's how I do my airway clearance.
Okay, thanks, Irene, and for this patient perspective. And now for a question for Paul and Michal as clinicians, because we need physiotherapists. So could you share your perspectives on how someone finds a physiotherapist specialized in respiratory health or specifically in bronchiectasis?
We're very tricky to find. It's almost like we're trying to avoid work, isn't it? Um, so it is challenging. I'll give you the UK perspective. Typically, we patients would go to primary care, so that would be their kind of general practitioners, and be referred to most likely like a generic respiratory appointment at their local hospital, or if that's a bit further afield. Within that hospital, you something get specialized services, and the bronchiectasis service in general are kind of scattered throughout the UK. So that's the kind of first protocol. There are hospital websites as well. So, for example, if you kind of Googled kind of Newcastle hospital websites, you can type in bronchiectasis and it comes up if there is a service and then who would be in that service. So, kind of within your local area, if you kind of when you go into Google, it normally says, can you share your location or whatever, and then you might be able to kind of find it that way. And the final way, which if you want to go around the private route, would be and this is particularly for the UK. There's societies, so we have the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, which is the kind of governing one of the kind of governing professional bodies of physiotherapists, and within that, there's a tool called Physiotherapy to You, and you type in respiratory or bronchiectasis, and again, it comes up with private kind of clinics near you. So that's the kind of the main ways.
Yeah, it's also challenging where I practice in Israel because there's not that many specialized physiotherapists that know airway clearance. If you are being taken care of by a bronchiectasis center, they should know. So I usually keep a list of the physiotherapists that are specialists in working in my area. And what I really like to tell my patients, because even when I refer them to and I ask them to go see someone very specific, not always it is possible. So what I recommend to my patient is to first find online some useful guidance on airway clearance techniques. There's many such guidance pages that are available, such as the ELF site, the Australian Bronchiectasis Toolbox, and there's many more. And until they find a physiotherapist, they can at least practice and start doing and have an idea what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And also, they should know what to expect when they reach that physiotherapy specialist, because sometimes they make an appointment and unfortunately the person that takes care of them is not a specialist in airway clearance. So if they are well trained, they would recognize that immediately and then go back to us and try to find another one. It is tricky, and I'm really sorry to have to say that, but it's an ongoing process, and people can should work on that and until they find the right therapist.
Okay, thanks, Michal. As you were talking about airway clearance techniques online, Daniel, a question for you. If someone is learning airway clearance techniques online, what do they need to know?
I'd say that the first thing that's important to know is that the person that's teaching the airway clearance is qualified to teach the airway clearance. So I would recommend going to well-recognized sites. For example, the European Lung Foundation has multiple videos on airway clearance techniques for patients who are by respiratory physiotherapists who are trained in teaching airway clearance. It's also worth trying different types of airway clearance and see what works for you, because there are lots of different types of airway clearance out there, and there are lots of different videos. And I find even here in Israel, everybody teaches airway clearance a little bit differently, and it may have the same name, but it potentially looks completely different being taught by different physiotherapists. And it isn't necessarily wrong or right. It's everybody's take, or everyone learns slightly different. So it's worth trying and looking at the different videos and seeing really what works for you, because we are all very individual. There is no one size fits all with this, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. And as you talk about individual situation, Eleni, a question for you. And how do we choose the best clearance technique that fits our spirometry results? If you can explain a bit for us.
Just an idea. The spirometry actually is a very helpful examination that gives us a clue about how the air moves in and out from the lungs. But the spirometry alone does not determine which airway clearance technique we have to teach our patients, or even for the patients, if they have the spirometry results, they cannot decide which technique they have to use. Generally, when the airflow, there is a big airflow obstruction, severe airflow obstruction, or high hyperventilation, we emphasize to use gentle breathing and to avoid forced exhalation, because this helps the airways to be open and not collapse. Such techniques are those we use when we teach the patients to have a device, like an oscillatory PET device or a PET device. And we combine this device with some breathing techniques. If patients have mild obstruction, they can do airway, the active cycle of breathing techniques, the one I showed you before, or they can have autogenic drainage. And also for those patients who produce a large amount of mucus, probably they benefit with a combination of techniques that combine devices together with effective coughing, etc. But as the previous panelist said, it is very important to recognize not only the spirometry results, but the breathing pattern of our patients, the personal preferences they have, and also how the amount of mucus is changed days by days. So,
okay. Thanks, Eleni, for these advices and explanations for patients who have a lot of mucus. But Another point, Michal, it will be a question for you because all patients don't have mucus, and in case of dry bronchiectasis, do they still need airway clearance? If you can explain us, please.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are patients, a subset of patients who have dry bronchiectasis, and there are another subset of patients who do have mucus, but they don't just produce it. So I think the first thing is to know which kind your patient is. And if they do have mucus but just can't get it out, then it's extremely important that they do airway clearance and they learn how to do airway clearance. For people with dry bronchiectasis, we just don't have the evidence, we don't have the data that would tell us. My experience is that it is very, very difficult to convince someone to do airway clearance if there's nothing coming out, and they will just not do it. So I do advise to exercise, which is good for many other things, not just for airway clearance for these patients. But I think it's really important to know, and sometimes I do refer patients for bronchoscopy just to see what's inside, if there is any mucus, and then I should really insist on them learning the right technique, or there is actually no mucus, and then I just say, well, you should do your exercises, but not formal airway clearance. And I think we should move ahead to the section, and some questions were received on specific devices and specific techniques. And we got a question, and I want to ask you, Paul, about devices. So the person asked about vest, whistle, other, and I see someone in the chat also asked about the Simiox device. So how do you choose?
Very good question. And again, with the kind of internet these days, many patients will Google things before they come to see me. So when it comes to devices, it will and it does depend on what's available in your kind of hospital system. So there are certain handheld devices. For example, I think Eleni mentioned OPEP, these oscillating devices that will have several brand names. And the Simiox device, again, it works slightly different. So it's got a different mechanism or a different kind of mechanism of action. As well as I think I did see in the chat there one called the E70, which kind of modulates both the inspiratory and expiratory flow. So with regards to what's the best, as you've kind of heard, everyone's slightly different, and it will depend on what you're trying to do. So if, for example, Eleni had mentioned about spirometry, you've got someone who maybe has significantly restricted spirometry or kind of dynamic collapse of the airways, you might want to focus on kind of PEP devices or OPEP. So they support those airways to be kind of patent whilst they're doing airway clearance. Alternatively, most of those devices can sometimes require a lot of effort. So if you think about, a typical prescription, physio 10 by 10, so do 10 sets of 10, or that's quite effortful. So people who might have coexisting conditions with large levels of fatigue, who physically can't do that, maybe more passive machines, again, they're quite expensive, but the Simiox, as an example, is a negative pressure machine. So it sort of works during passive expiration. So it's less effort to patients, but it is quite a new device, I will say. There's currently a large randomized controlled trial going on at the minute with it in bronchiectasis to determine its efficacy. So, hopefully in future webinars, I'll be able to give you a bit more solid evidence based on that particular one. So I hope that kind of helps.
Yeah, and another question to Eleni. So when your patient is being prescribed nebulizers, inhalers, as well as airway techniques, so how do you combine these, and what's the order that you recommend?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. It might sound better. Thank you. So the exact sequence of the inhaled medication depends on the medication that has been prescribed. For example, if you take bronchodilators, the inhalers should start 10 to 20 minutes before doing the airway clearance technique. Bronchodilators help the muscles of the airways to open and making them wider so the mucus can be removed easily. If the inhaled medication are corticosteroids or antibiotics, they should be used after the airway clearance technique.
Okay, thanks, Eleni, for these elements. And question to you, Irene, as a patient, what patient-friendly airway clearance devices would you recommend, please?
Thank you, Justine. Well, in fact, I tried devices when I was first diagnosed. I've tried the flutter, the acapella, and shaker, but I've not tried out aerobica, which I think is very common in England. Now, what I found is that I found these devices did not help me much. And the problem is it requires good cleaning and air drying every time I use them. So I've dropped them now. What I do is I will do autogenic drainage instead, because with this technique, I don't need any devices. And for listeners who try to get a device, I think they should think about one thing, is in case you're on a trip, for example, what device do you think you would bring along, which is easy to use and easy to clean? So this is one thing that you have to consider. For me, I obviously find ACBT and autogenic drainage is a very good techniques to learn and practice.
Okay, thanks, Irene. And finally, for this part, a question for you, Danielle. What airway clearance aids work when it's difficult to cough out mucus?
Again, I think that's, again, it's really individual because everybody's different. There really isn't one specific device that's been suggested as the best device in bronchiectasis. Evidence has not come up with something to say this is the best thing and this helps patients who have difficulty in clearing secretions. It really is a trial and error of what works for you. And if your device doesn't work for you, it could be that you're not using it effectively, or you're not doing your breathing correct with your airway device, or combining your airway clearance techniques correctly with the device. So it's worth bringing your device to your airway clearance session with your respiratory physiotherapist to check that you're doing it correctly. Because I have multiple patients that come in for airway clearance and go, oh, I left my machine at my aerobic at home or my flutter at home. And I was like, well, how do we know if you're using it correctly if we don't try it together? So bring it along and let's see why it's not working, would be my advice.
Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah, I think we should probably move to questions on daily management. And there's one that I would like to also forward to Danielle. If someone doesn't have mucus daily, but does have mucus when there's a change during exacerbations.
Sorry, you cut off during the question. Can you please repeat?
Oh, I'm sorry. So if someone has mucus only when there's exacerbating and not when they're stable, what would... Oh,
sorry, I still miss it. Are you asking if they only have secretions during an exacerbation, what airway clearance would you like them to would be the best? I think it's, again,
yes.
It's
what
airway clearance would we recommend, or would we only recommend doing airway clearance during an exacerbation?
Second one.
The second one, okay. It would be definitely to try and see which airway clearance works for them. There really are a lot of different airway clearance techniques out there, and it's worth, if you've never had airway clearance session before, I would look up things like active cycle of breathing technique and autogenic drainage and try them when you're not at your best and see what works for you. You want to see what exhausts you the least and is most effective in clearing your secretions, because if you're going to fatigue very quickly during the airway clearance session, it's not going to be effective when you're unwell. So you need to think about conserving your energy and doing what airway clearance technique is more effective. Potentially, you might find you need to do shorter sessions, but more frequently throughout the day to manage it if you're really fatigued, etc.
And Irene, how do you find motivation? I mean, doing daily airway clearance is not always easy. How do you find that motivation to keep doing it?
To be honest, it's not easy at all. Even though airway clearance is a very healthy habit that we need to have, but making this fun and sociable is unfortunately impossible. But try to develop skills that fit you most. For example, try ACBT and autogenic drainage as the new suggested. These will save you time in the cleaning. Spend 20 to 30 minutes in each session, twice a day. So develop this into a kind of habit. This can really make a difference. You will have less cough and less mucus coming up during the day. And I think this is a real motivation. So try join the patient group as well, because when you share the lived experience with your members, fellow patients, it will motivate you to keep up with things. So these are my suggestions.
Yes. So thank you so much, Irene. And I have a question to Eleni. A lot of mainly female patients and after childbirth have issues with incontinence. So how do we do our airway clearance with preserving the pelvic floor through coughing?
Yes, I will give some practical tips. Very briefly. Most women should use coughing instead of repeated and hard coughing. This is one advice I give to my patients. Before you have, they have to support the pelvic floor muscles. So I advise them to gently squeeze the pelvic floor muscles, and as I teach them how to do it, and then they should maintain this gentle pressure during coughing or coughing. Another practical tip is to avoid forceful coughing repetitions over and over. So, and another tip is to use some sanitary pads, either on a daily basis or when they have more mucus and they cough more. It is obvious that some physical therapists are specialized in pelvic floor exercises. So for those women that who have this problem, they have also find a pelvic floor trainer to teach them how to use these exercises when they have extended cough.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot for this explanation. And we already coming towards the end of our time now. And it's time to really say that we appreciate all these exchanges with a lot of advices, explanations, taking into account the patient perspective and also clinician's perspective, because sometimes there are some differences, but it's always to be able to move forwards together and to be more healthy in spite of bronchiectasis. So I really want to thank everyone for your participation, for your explanations. And before I hand back to Lauren from European Lung Foundation remarks, please, Michal, if you have some final reflections following this session.
Yeah, so
Oh,
I'm
sorry,
sorry, Paul.
Mikhail, sorry. I don't want to ruin the running order. I just wanted to ask one really kind of important question that I get asked by patients quite a lot, and I'd really love your input from a medical perspective. And when kind of patients do cough up some blood or cough up blood within the mucus, how long should they kind of either wait before they should resume their airway clearance? So is it normal to see that, or what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, so that's really an important question, and I think the answer is dependent on the amount of blood, because it's really common to see some blood in your secretion. It's not normal. It's usually something that you should turn to your clinician and maybe get treatment because we think it's a part of an exacerbation. But unless it's really copious amounts of blood, like going on all the time, I think actually you need to increase. Of course, if there is a lot of blood, like 2 spoonfuls, a third of cup going on, then you should stop what you're doing and turn to medical advice. But if you just see little streaks, I don't think that is a cause to stop the airway clearance. On the contrary, I think you need to enhance what you're doing and then also get some antibiotic. So, and I just want to maybe share my reflection is that as a clinician, I think your airway clearance is your number one treatment for bronchiectasis. It's cheap, it's safe, it's extremely effective, it's safer than any drug that we know or may treat you with. It just takes up a lot of time and practice, but you really need to practice to make perfect and to keep going and keep doing it. So I think it is the number one treatment for bronchiectasis if I have to choose.
Okay, thanks, Michal, for your reflections. And thanks a lot to our panelists for such thoughtful responses today, advices, and really helpful conversations. And thank you to everyone for your submitted questions. And please now, Lauren, if you can give us some final words.
Yes, thank you very much, Justine. Just 1 second while I get my screen working. So just wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining today. We really hope we've managed to answer as many of your questions as possible, but if your question has not been answered, there's lots of resources available online which will help you find out a bit more. So have a look through the slide on the screen at the moment. So ELF has comprehensive information on bronchiectasis on the website. There's a self-care guide that you can download in 13 languages. And we also have new guides on nebulizers, inhalers and sputum. So do please check these out. If you missed our annual bronchiectasis patient conference that takes place in March every year, you can catch up with all the talks and the recording online, and again access the full Q&A document that we made available after the event. As Pippa mentioned earlier, we also have the new ELF Connect Hub that brings all these resources together. And there's other sources of information from the COPD Foundation's Bronchiectasis and NTM initiative, and also information on there about World Bronchiectasis Day and further resources. Lung Foundation Australia has a really good bronchiectasis toolkit full of useful information, and of course EMBARC is full of information as well, so please do visit their website. There's a new website that they have with a new section on patient resources. So there's lots of ways you can get involved with raising awareness of bronchiectasis and helping to improve research and care. If we jump to the next slide, you can join our bronchiectasis patient advisory group, where you can share your experiences and collaborate with other people living with bronchiectasis across Europe. There's also a chance to work on projects and input into the work that clinicians are doing in the field. If you want to know any more about the group, have a look at our website, and you can email us as well at info@europeanlung.org to find out a bit more about what's involved. Then you also might want to get more involved in events and activities that are happening today and in the coming days for World Bronchiectasis Day, so check out the links on the screen. And finally, if you do want to join us on ELF Connect, you'll be able to talk to other people living with bronchiectasis, hear from healthcare professionals, search the resources, or submit a question in the Ask the Expert section. So these links are on screen. You can scan the QR code to join, and if you need any further information or if you can't find what you're looking for, please do just email us. So on the next slide, please. The last thing that I can do today is just to say thank you. So thank you so much to our panel of bronchiectasis experts. So Irene, Danielle, Eleni, Paul, and Mikhail. We really appreciate you giving your time and sharing your expertise today. And Justine and Mikhail as well for hosting and managing the questions. There's so much that we could cover, and it's very hard to make sure we try and fit everything in. So thank you to you all for going through as much as we can. As we mentioned earlier, any questions that we haven't managed to cover, we will be making available in a Q&A document, which we'll send out to attendees, but it will also be available on our website. Thank you as well to the EMBARC Steering Committee and the ELF Bronchiectasis Patient Advisory Group, who have all been instrumental in planning for these events. We really appreciate their support. And a final thank you to all our attendees for joining us today. We hope that it's been useful, and please check our website for further events that you can join. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you very much. It's been really enjoyable. And thank you to the ELF.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mikhail.
everyone.
Everybody.
And thanks to all the attendees as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.